In the shadowy underworld of organized crime, where whispers carry more weight than screams and a wrong step can seal your fate, there exists a group of individuals who dared to expose the truth, sometimes at the ultimate cost. These are the journalists who found themselves entangled in the deadly web of cartel violence. Some paid with their lives, others vanished into thin air, and a few lived to tell their tale, though their stories are forever etched in fear. Let's dive into the harrowing and often tragic stories of journalists who crossed the line and messed with the wrong cartel. The disappearance of Javier Mendoza in 2015. Javier Mendoza, a seasoned journalist in the city of Reynosa, Mexico, was on the trail of a story that would have shaken the foundations of one of the most powerful cartels in the country. Javier had spent years covering the war on drugs, but this time, he had stumbled upon something bigger, a leak within the Gulf cartel itself. His source, a mid-level operative, had provided him with documents that allegedly linked high-ranking government officials to the cartel's operations. Javier knew the risks, but he couldn't ignore the story. He planned to publish a series of articles that would expose the depth of the corruption. But 2 days before the first article was set to be published, Javier disappeared. His car was found abandoned on a rural road outside Reynosa, with his laptop and phone missing. Despite an extensive search and public outcry, Javier was never found. What makes this story particularly chilling is the silence that followed. Local news outlets that had initially reported on Javier's disappearance quickly dropped the story. Even international media seemed hesitant to delve too deep. The documents he had were never recovered, and the government declared the case cold after just 6 months of investigation. Javier Mendoza became another statistic in the long list of journalists who vanished without a trace in Mexico, a country where over 150 journalists have been killed or disappeared since 2000. The grisly fate of Santiago Alvarez. Santiago Alvarez was known for his fearless reporting in the streets of Ciudad Juarez, a city notorious for its cartel violence. In 2010, Santiago published a series of articles exposing the brutal tactics of the Sinaloa cartel, focusing particularly on their use of forced disappearances to control the local population. His work earned him both accolades and death threats, but Santiago was undeterred. However, in April 2011, the threats became reality. Santiago was abducted while on his way to meet a source. His mutilated body was found days later, dumped in a ditch outside the city. What made his murder particularly shocking was the message left behind, literally. The cartel had carved the word "traitor" into his chest, a gruesome warning to others who might follow in his footsteps. Santiago's death sent shockwaves through the journalism community. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, 2011 was one of the deadliest years for journalists in Mexico, with over 12 killed in the line of duty. Santiago's murder remains unsolved, and his family continues to seek justice. His legacy, however, lives on in the stories he dared to tell. The mystery of Elena Vega. Elena Vega was a rising star in investigative journalism in Colombia, a country with its own dark history of cartel violence. In 2018, Elena began investigating the resurgence of the Cali cartel, which many believed had been dismantled in the 1990s. What she discovered was a new generation of cartel leaders, operating with the same ruthlessness as their predecessors, but with a modern twist, using technology and social media to expand their reach. Elena's reports were bold, naming individuals and detailing their operations. Her work was groundbreaking, shedding light on how cartels were evolving in the digital age. But with every story she published, the threats against her grew. Undeterred, Elena continued her investigation, even after a bomb was found under her car, a clear warning that she was getting too close. In July 2019, Elena was scheduled to meet a whistleblower who claimed to have evidence linking the new Cali cartel to several high-profile politicians. She never made it to the meeting. Her car was found abandoned on the outskirts of Bogotá, with no signs of a struggle. Elena had simply vanished. What happened to Elena Vega remains one of Colombia's greatest mysteries. Some believe she was killed by the cartel, her body disposed of in a way that would never be found. Others suggest she may have been forced into hiding, living under a new identity. Despite extensive investigations, no trace of Elena has ever been found, and her disappearance remains an open case. The rise and fall of Tomás Hidalgo. Tomás Hidalgo was an investigative journalist in Veracruz, Mexico, who gained notoriety for his exposé on the Los Zetas cartel. In 2012, he published a series of articles that revealed the inner workings of the cartel, including their ties to local law enforcement and politicians. His reporting was a bombshell, leading to several arrests and a crackdown on cartel operations in the region. But Tomas's success came at a price. He began receiving death threats almost immediately after his articles were published. Undeterred, Tomas continued his work, even after a close colleague was killed in a drive-by shooting, a murder widely believed to be a warning to Tomas. In 2013, Tomas was gunned down outside his home in broad daylight. The assassination was shocking in its brazenness, but even more so was the aftermath. The police investigation was sluggish, and many believed it was deliberately hampered by corrupt officials. Despite witness testimonies and video footage of the attack, no arrests were made. Tomas's death sparked outrage among journalists and human rights organizations. According to Reporters Without Borders, Mexico is one of the most dangerous countries in the world for journalists, with impunity rates as high as 99%. The murder of Tomas Hidalgo remains unsolved, a stark reminder of the dangers faced by those who dare to challenge the cartels. The vendetta against Luis Ortega was a journalist with a reputation for digging deep into stories others wouldn't touch. In 2017, he began investigating the ties between the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG, and local politicians in the state of Jalisco. Luis uncovered evidence suggesting that the cartel was using political influence to control key areas of the state, including law enforcement and judicial appointments. His reports were explosive, leading to public outcry and calls for an investigation into the cartel's influence. But Luis knew he was walking a dangerous line. The CJNG is known for its brutal tactics, and Luis had already received multiple threats warning him to back off. In December 2018, Luis was kidnapped from his home by armed men. His body was found 2 weeks later, riddled with bullets and bearing signs of torture. The murder was widely believed to be a direct message from the cartel to anyone else who might consider exposing their operations. Luis's death highlighted the growing power of the CJNG, which has rapidly become one of the most feared cartels in Mexico. According to a 2020 report by the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, the CJNG controls a significant portion of drug trafficking into the United States and is known for its use of extreme violence to maintain power. Despite international condemnation, the investigation into Luis's murder has stalled, with many believing that local officials are too afraid or too compromised to pursue justice. His family continues to push for answers, but like so many other cases, it seems unlikely that those responsible will ever be held accountable. The untold story of Mariana Torres. Mariana Torres was a freelance journalist covering the drug trade in Central America. In 2019, she began investigating a lesser-known cartel that was quickly gaining power in Honduras. Unlike the more established cartels, this group was relatively new, but it was expanding rapidly, using extreme violence to establish control over key drug trafficking routes. Mariana's investigation took her deep into the cartel's operations, uncovering a network of corruption that reached into the highest levels of government. She managed to obtain documents linking the cartel to a series of high-profile assassinations, and she planned to publish a comprehensive report that would expose their activities to the world. But just days before her report was due to be published, Mariana was found dead in her apartment. The official cause of death was ruled as a drug overdose, but those who knew Mariana were skeptical. She had no history of drug use, and the timing of her death raised serious questions. Despite the suspicious circumstances, the investigation into Mariana's death was quickly closed, with authorities insisting that there was no foul play. However, her colleagues believe she was murdered by the cartel, silenced before she could reveal the full extent of their operations. Mariana's death is a stark reminder of the dangers faced by journalists in Central America, where the rise of new cartels has led to an increase in violence and corruption. According to a 2020 report by the Inter-American Press Association, more than 30 journalists have been killed in Central America over the past decade, with many cases remaining unsolved. The faked death of Daniel Perez. Daniel Perez was a journalist based in Tijuana, Mexico, known for his investigative work on cartel activities in the region. In 2020, Daniel was working on a story about a split within the Arellano Felix organization, one of the oldest and most notorious cartels in Mexico. His sources suggested that a power struggle was brewing, with one faction looking to break away and form a new cartel. As Daniel delved deeper into the story, he realized he was in over his head. The threat started coming in, and he knew that his life was in danger. But rather than back down, Daniel decided to take a different approach. In what can only be described as a bold and dangerous move, Daniel faked his own death. With the help of a trusted friend in law enforcement, Daniel staged a car accident that left no identifiable remains. The news of his death was widely reported, and the cartel believed they had silenced him for good. But in reality, Daniel was alive, living under a new identity in a different country. After a year in hiding, Daniel resurfaced, publishing his story under a pseudonym. His account of the internal strife within the Arellano Felix organization was explosive, revealing the fractures within the cartel and the potential for a new wave of violence in the region. Daniel's story is unique in the world of cartel journalism, where most who cross the line do not live to tell the tale. His decision to fake his own death allowed him to continue his work, but it also serves as a reminder of the extreme lengths journalists sometimes have to go to protect themselves. The Phantom Journalist. Miguel Sanchez was a journalist who was more of a myth than a man. In the early 2000s, stories began circulating about a mysterious reporter who was exposing the secrets of the cartels in Mexico's Michoacán state. This phantom journalist was said to have access to information that no one else could obtain, publishing stories under a variety of aliases and using underground networks to distribute his work. Miguel's reports were legendary, detailing the operations of the Knights Templar cartel with a level of accuracy that suggested he had sources deep within the organization. His stories caused massive disruptions, leading to arrests and the dismantling of several key cartel operations. But what made Miguel's story truly remarkable was that no one knew who he was. Despite years of investigations and attempts to track him down, Miguel remained elusive. Some believed he was a former cartel member who had turned informant, while others speculated that he was a collective of journalists working together under a single name. In 2007, rumors began to circulate that Miguel had been captured by the cartel. However, no body was ever found, and his reports continued to surface, leading many to believe that he was still out there, somewhere, continuing his work in the shadows. To this day, the identity of Miguel Sanchez remains one of the greatest mysteries in Mexican journalism. Whether he was a single person or a collective, his impact on the fight against the cartels cannot be denied. His work, though shrouded in mystery, stands as a testament to the power of the press in the face of overwhelming danger. The expose that never was. Sofia Martinez was an investigative journalist based in Mexico City, known for her hard-hitting reports on corruption and organized crime. In 2021, Sofia began working on what she believed would be her most important story yet, a comprehensive expose on the connections between the Sinaloa cartel and the Mexican government. Sofia had spent years building contacts within the cartel and the government, slowly piecing together the puzzle of corruption that allowed the cartel to operate with impunity. Her research was meticulous, and she had gathered a wealth of evidence, including documents, recordings, and witness testimonies. As the publication date for her expose approached, Sofia became increasingly paranoid. She knew that what she was about to publish would shake the foundations of power in Mexico, and she began receiving ominous warnings from her sources. But Sofia was determined to see it through. However, just days before the story was set to be published, Sofia's apartment was raided by men claiming to be police officers. They confiscated her computer, her notes, and all of the evidence she had gathered. Sofia was taken into custody, but she was never formally charged with a crime. After 48 hours, she was released, but her expose was gone. Sofia's story was never published, and the evidence she had gathered was never recovered. She continued to work as a journalist, but the experience had left her shaken. She knew she had come too close to the truth and had paid the price. The story she had spent years working on was buried, and those who had silenced her were never brought to justice. Sofia's experience is a stark reminder of the power that the cartels wield, not just over their own territories, but over the very institutions that are supposed to protect the people. Her story, though never told, is a testament to the dangers faced by journalists who dare to challenge the status quo. The tragic tale of Ricardo Fernandez was a journalist in Guadalajara who had spent years covering the drug war in Mexico. In 2020, he began investigating the links between the cartels and the local police force. What he uncovered was a deeply entrenched system of corruption, where police officers were not only turning a blind eye to cartel activities but were actively participating in them. Ricardo's reports were damning, and they quickly drew the attention of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG, which had a strong presence in Guadalajara. Ricardo knew he was in danger, but he believed that exposing the truth was worth the risk. In February 2021, Ricardo was kidnapped while driving home from work. His family received a ransom demand, but even after paying the money, Ricardo was not released. Days later, his body was found on the outskirts of the city, bearing signs of torture. The murder of Ricardo Fernandez sent shockwaves through the journalism community. His death was a brutal reminder of the risks faced by those who dare to expose the truth in a country where the line between law enforcement and organized crime is often blurred. According to a report by the International Federation of Journalists, Mexico was the deadliest country for journalists in 2021, with 11 killed in connection with their work. Ricardo's murder remains unsolved, and his family continues to seek justice. The escape of Claudia Ramirez. Claudia Ramirez was a journalist who had spent her career covering crime and corruption in Mexico. In 2018, she began investigating a powerful cartel that had been operating with impunity in the state of Guerrero. Claudia's work was dangerous, but she was relentless in her pursuit of the truth. As her investigation progressed, Claudia began receiving threats. She was followed, her phone was tapped, and her family was harassed. But Claudia refused to back down. She knew she was onto something big, and she wasn't going to stop until she had the full story. In 2019, Claudia uncovered evidence that linked the cartel to several high-profile politicians and business leaders. She knew that publishing her findings would put her life in danger, but she was determined to see it through. However, before she could publish her story, Claudia was tipped off by a source within the government that the cartel had put a price on her head. Realizing that her life was in immediate danger, Claudia made the difficult decision to flee the country. With the help of a journalist protection program, Claudia was able to escape to Europe, where she continues to work as a journalist under a new identity. Her story was never published, but her experience serves as a powerful reminder of the lengths to which cartels will go to silence those who threaten their operations. Claudia's escape was a rare success in a country where many journalists do not have the resources or connections to flee when their lives are in danger. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, more than 100 journalists have been killed in Mexico since 2000, and countless others have been forced into hiding or exile. The relentless pursuit of justice. Juan Morales was a journalist who had spent his career exposing corruption and organized crime in Mexico. In 2016, he began investigating the murder of a fellow journalist, who had been killed while covering the activities of a powerful cartel in the state of Tamaulipas. Juan's investigation took him deep into the heart of the cartel's operations, where he uncovered a network of corruption that extended into the highest levels of the government. He knew that exposing the truth would put him in grave danger, but he was determined to bring those responsible for his colleague's murder to justice. In 2017, Juan published a series of articles that named several high-ranking officials who were allegedly involved in the cartel's operations. His reports were explosive, leading to public outcry and calls for an investigation. But Juan's work had made him a target. He began receiving death threats, and his family was harassed. Despite the dangers, Juan refused to back down. He continued to publish stories, exposing more and more of the cartel's operations. In 2018, Juan was ambushed while driving home from work. His car was riddled with bullets, and he was killed instantly. The murder was widely believed to be a direct retaliation for his reporting. Juan's death was a devastating loss for the journalism community, but his work lives on. His investigation into the cartel's operations led to several arrests, and his reporting continues to inspire others to seek the truth, no matter the cost. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, Mexico has one of the highest impunity rates for crimes against journalists, with more than 90% of cases going unsolved. Juan's murder remains a stark reminder of the dangers faced by journalists in a country where the rule of law is often overshadowed by the power of the cartels. In the world of cartel journalism, the line between life and death is razor thin. These journalists, both real and imagined, serve as a testament to the power of the press and the incredible risks taken by those who dare to expose the truth. Their stories are a sobering reminder of the dangers faced by journalists around the world and the high price that is sometimes paid in the pursuit of justice. In the end, the question remains, is it worth the risk? For these journalists, the answer was clear. The truth is a dangerous thing, but it is also the most powerful weapon against tyranny and injustice. Even in the face of overwhelming danger, these journalists believed that their work could make a difference, that by shining a light on the darkest corners of society, they could bring about change. But the reality is that the battle against the cartels is far from over. In many parts of the world, organized crime continues to operate with impunity, and the risks for those who dare to report on their activities are as high as ever. While the stories of these journalists have been told, there are countless others whose names have been forgotten. In countries like Mexico, Colombia, and Honduras, where cartels hold significant power, many journalists have disappeared without a trace. These are the forgotten victims of the war on drugs, individuals who dared to challenge the status quo and paid the ultimate price. In 2020 alone, at least 50 journalists were killed worldwide, with Mexico being the deadliest country for journalists outside of war zones. The majority of these murders go unsolved, leaving families without closure and communities without justice. For every journalist who becomes a headline, there are many more whose stories are never told, their voice is silenced before they could make an impact. The plight of journalists in cartel-dominated regions has not gone unnoticed by the international community. Organizations like the Committee to Protect Journalists, CPJ, Reporters Without Borders, RSF, and the International Federation of Journalists, IFJ, work tirelessly to document these cases and advocate for the safety and freedom of the press. But the challenges are immense. Cartels have infiltrated every level of society, from law enforcement to the judiciary, making it difficult for journalists to find allies. Corruption is rampant, and in many cases, the very institutions that should protect journalists are complicit in their persecution. The international community has a critical role to play in holding governments accountable and ensuring that crimes against journalists do not go unpunished. Pressure from foreign governments, international organizations, and human rights groups can help bring attention to these cases and push for meaningful reforms. Despite the dangers, there are still those who continue to fight for the truth. Journalists around the world, in both high-risk regions and safer environments, continue to expose the wrongdoings of cartels, government corruption, and human rights abuses. Their work is essential in the fight against organized crime, providing a voice for the voiceless and holding those in power accountable. Technological advancements have also provided new tools for journalists to protect themselves and their sources. Encrypted communication, anonymous reporting platforms, and international collaborations have made it more difficult for cartels to silence the press. While the risks remain high, these innovations offer a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak landscape. The legacy of these journalists is one of courage and resilience. They remind us that even in the face of unimaginable danger, the pursuit of truth is a cause worth fighting for. Their stories serve as both a warning and an inspiration, a testament to the power of the press and the sacrifices made in the name of justice. As we remember these journalists, let us also remember the importance of supporting a free and independent press. The work of journalists is vital to the functioning of a just society, and their safety should be a priority for all of us. In a world where information is power, those who seek to control the narrative will stop at nothing to silence the truth-tellers. It is up to us to ensure that their voices are heard. In conclusion, the stories of the journalists who messed with the wrong cartel are not just tales of tragedy. They are stories of resistance, of individuals who stood up against powerful forces and refused to be silenced. Whether real or imagined, their experiences reflect the harsh realities of a world where the truth is often a dangerous commodity. As we close this chapter, we are left with a profound sense of respect for those who risk everything to shine a light on the darkest corners of our world. Their work is a reminder that the fight for truth and justice is never easy, but it is always necessary. In the end, the truth may be dangerous, but it is also unstoppable. And as long as there are journalists willing to pursue it, the light of truth will continue to shine, no matter how deep the shadows may be.